The room is already awake when the chapter begins. Not alert, just awake enough. Lights hum overhead, fluorescent and tired, vibrating softly against metal housings that have been warm for years. The sound is constant, it never changes. People stop hearing it after a while, but in rooms like this, it is always there, filling the silence so completely that true quiet never arrives. A chair creaks. A body shifts its weight. The night shift has been underway for hours now, long enough for time to lose its edges, long enough for the clock on the wall to feel decorative rather than authoritative. Its second hand moves, but no one is watching closely enough to care. There was only one person here. Not unusual, not alarming. This is how nights are designed to work. Fewer voices, fewer interruptions, fewer mistakes. At least, that is the theory. The building settles differently at night. Pipes cool, doors stop opening, systems hum instead of shout. A console glows dimly, buttons wait to be pressed, screens display information no one urgently needs. Everything suggests continuity. Everything suggests that the next hour will look exactly like the last. A radio sits at the edge of the desk. It has weight, not physical weight. Something heavier, a presence earned through repetition. It has been used too many times to feel like equipment and not enough times to feel alive. The speaker crackles, just once. It's the kind of sound that barely registers, static shifting, a breath of interference. The radio is always doing that. It adjusts itself, like an animal resettling in sleep. The worker does not react. The handwritten log remains open. Ink has dried where a pen paused earlier, mid-thought. The handwriting is neat, but not careful. It belongs to someone who expects no one else to read it. Another minute passes, then another. The room breathes. There is a moment, small, almost nothing, where something changes. Not visibly, not audibly. If you were standing there, you wouldn't point to it and say, "That was it." You would miss it entirely. The radio crackles again. This time, it does not settle. Static builds, then drops away into an open channel. The kind of open that feels exposed, empty but listening. The worker glances over, not sharply, not with concern, just a glance, habit more than instinct, the kind of look you give a door you expect to remain closed. A finger presses the transmit button. The click is soft. "Radio check," the voice says. It sounds ordinary, neutral, calm, a voice that has said these words many times before, in the same tone, at the same volume, without expecting drama in return. The button is released. Silence answers. Not exactly silence, the low electrical hiss remains, but no voice rises to meet it, no acknowledgement, no confirmation. The worker waits. This is still within normal parameters. Signals drift, equipment lags, people miss calls, night stretches things thinner. The radio crackles again, briefly, as if clearing its throat. The worker presses the button once more. Radio check. A pause follows, slightly longer this time. The fluorescent lights hum. The clock advances another second. Somewhere far away, something mechanical clicks into place. Nothing comes back. The worker exhales through the nose, a small release of air, barely audible, mild annoyance maybe, or mild nothing at all. A third attempt would not be unreasonable, but the hand does not move right away. There is a feeling, so faint it barely earns the word, that something has tilted. Not wrong, just off, like a familiar song played half a beat slower than remembered. The button is pressed again. "Come in." The word hangs there, suspended in static. Still no response. The radio speaker emits a thin hiss, steady and patient. It is listening. It is always listening. That is its job. The worker waits longer now. Waiting is most of the job, after all. Minutes pass without ceremony, the kind of minutes that do not announce themselves. The clock keeps moving. The lights keep humming. The building continues to believe everything is fine. Eventually, the worker looks down at the log. The pen is picked up. A note is added, brief,
Functional, no embellishment. Something to indicate that a check was made, that procedure was followed, that the system, at least on paper, remains intact. The radio sits, quietly. Too quietly, maybe, but only in hindsight that word feels accurate. The worker shifts in the chair, adjusts posture, rolls one shoulder to ease stiffness. Night shifts do this to bodies. They fold people inward. The radio crackles again. This time, it is not static. It is almost a voice. Almost. A fragment of sound slips through, indistinct, unfinished, like someone starting to speak from very far away, then thinking better of it. The worker straightens. Now the attention sharpens. Not fear, not yet, just alertness, the kind taught by repetition. The transmit button is pressed immediately. Say again? The words are clear, controlled, professional. The response does not come. The channel remains open, humming softly as if waiting for something that is already past. A subtle frown forms. It is unconscious, muscles reacting before thought. Another radio check is attempted. Nothing. The worker adjusts a dial, taps the side of the radio lightly as if encouraging cooperation. Equipment responds to confidence sometimes, or superstition. The speaker hisses. No voice emerges. There is a moment now where the room feels larger. The walls do not move, but the space between them seems to stretch. The silence presses differently against the ears. The worker glances toward the door. Still closed, still locked, still normal. The radio is lifted slightly, brought closer, as if hearing were the problem. Respond, the worker says. It is not a command, it is not a plea, just a word released into the channel. Silence answers again. The fluorescent lights flicker, not fully, not dramatically, just a brief dip in intensity, like a blink. The radio clicks, then finally, a sound. It is faint, fragmented, a breath maybe, where the tail end of a word swallowed by interference. The worker freezes. The transmit button is pressed, held this time. I read something. Confirm. The radio answers with nothing at all. No static, no hiss, no crackle. The channel goes dead. Not disconnected, not powered down, just empty, as if the space where sound should exist has been removed. The worker stares at the radio. Seconds pass. The button is pressed again. Nothing happens. The indicator light does not change. The radio is alive, but unreachable. There is a heaviness now, a weight that settles low in the chest, unnamed and uninvited. It does not feel like danger. It feels like realization arriving too early to be useful. The worker logs the anomaly. The handwriting tightens slightly, just enough to notice if someone ever looks closely. A system check begins. Routine steps, ordered actions, the comfort of procedure. This is how uncertainty is managed, by breaking it into tasks. Everything checks out. Power is stable. Connections are intact. No alarms are triggered. The building insists nothing is wrong. The radio remains silent. Eventually, the worker stops trying to raise a response. There is nothing more to do without escalation, and escalation requires justification, evidence, something tangible. For now, this is just absence. Absence is difficult to report. The worker leans back in the chair. The fluorescent hum resumes its dominance. Time resumes its slow, indifferent crawl. Somewhere, beyond the reach of this room, something has ended. But here, in this moment, no one knows that yet. The shift continues. The log remains open. And after a long pause, long enough for the weight of that unanswered call to settle into the walls, the worker reaches underneath the desk. A drawer slides open. Inside are folders, thin, uniform, numbered. The hand hesitates over them, then selects the first. The folder is placed on the desk. The cover is plain, unremarkable, a label affixed neatly in the corner. The worker opens it, and for the first time, what just happened is given a shape. This is the moment the record begins. This is the moment the silence is acknowledged. This is the literal act of opening the file. File 001. The file does not announce itself. There is no warning label, no stamp of urgency, no mark to suggest danger. It sits among others that look exactly the same. Thin, gray, ordinary. File 001. The designation alone should not matter. Numbers are assigned all the time. Sequences begin somewhere by necessity, not importance. But this file did not become first because it was the most severe, or the most shocking, or the most public. It became first because nothing like it had been filed before, and nothing after it fit cleanly again. The purpose of an archive is clarity. That is what it promises, at least. Order imposed on chaos, a place where events are reduced to dates, actions, outcomes, where loss is flattened into paragraphs and confusion is disciplined into bullet points. This file resisted that process from the beginning. It exists because something happened that could not be closed. It was sealed not because of what it revealed, but because of what it refused to say. When the folder was first assembled, the intention was routine, an anomaly report, a communications irregularity, the kind of thing that generates paperwork, meetings, follow-ups that eventually conclude with phrases like, "No further action required." That conclusion never arrived. Inside the file, the first pages are administrative. Incident logs, system check summaries, shift reports written in careful language that avoids interpretation. The ink is uniform, the formatting precise. There is an effort here to make the event small enough to manage. One entry notes a failed radio confirmation. Another references an open channel with no return signal. A third records the time when normal communication was expected to resume. It never does. There are margins filled with notes added later. Different handwriting, different pen pressure. People returning to the same sentences, trying to make them mean more than they do. Trying to make them mean something. Personnel records are included next, or fragments of them. Names are present, then obscured. Lines of black ink interrupt sentences mid-thought. Titles remain where identities are removed. Roles without faces, responsibilities without voices. This is not unusual in sensitive files. What is unusual is how little there is beneath the redactions. No disciplinary history, no commendations, no personal annotations, just blank professionalism. People who existed only in function. There are references to interviews conducted afterward. No transcripts are included. Instead, there are placeholders. Audio recorded, stored separately, see attached, but no attachment follows. The archive notes this absence without comment, as if acknowledging it too directly might require an explanation no one is prepared to provide. Further into the file, the tone begins to change. The language grows cautious, not vague, cautious. Words are chosen as if they might be examined later, not for accuracy, but for blame. Unable to determine, no confirmation received, event duration unknown. Time becomes slippery here. Entries reference one another without aligning. A report cites a follow-up that appears earlier in the file. Another mentions a resolution that is never described. Pages are missing, not torn out, not damaged. They are simply not there. The numbering skips ahead cleanly, as if those pages were never meant to exist in the first place. Someone noticed. A handwritten note in the margin asks a question that goes unanswered. Was this filed elsewhere? There is no response. Audio materials are listed near the middle of the file. This is where most cases turn concrete. Voices anchor events, sound fills in what text cannot. The archive relies on recordings the way memory relies on tone. Here, the tapes are brief, too brief. One is labeled as a routine transmission check. Its runtime is under 30 seconds. Another is marked partial. Another ends with the word terminated, written twice, once typed, once handwritten over it. No reason is given. Playback notes describe abrupt endings. No fade-out, no audible disconnect, just sudden silence, as if the sound itself had been removed rather than stopped. One technician's annotation reads, "Tape intact, no damage detected." Another, written later, adds, "Silence begins mid-signal." No attempt is made to interpret this further. The file does not speculate, it refuses to. That refusal is part of why it remains sealed. There is no final report, no summary page, no conclusion signed and dated at the back. Instead, there is a memo. It is brief, it uses careful language, it does not explain, only instructs. File to be closed, pending further information. Further information never arrives. Over time, the file becomes uncomfortable, not because it points to wrongdoing, not because it suggests conspiracy, but because it cannot be finished. Archives are built on endings, especially tragic ones. A loss acknowledged is still an ending. A cause identified is still a period at the end of a sentence. This file has no period. It trails off. People who access it leave notes that are never followed up on, questions that remain written only once, dates penciled in and never revised. Eventually, access becomes infrequent, then rare, then ceremonial. New archivists are told about File 001 in the way people mention a room no one uses anymore. It is there, it exists, you should know it exists. But you are not encouraged to open it. Not because it is forbidden, because it is unsatisfying. There is nothing dramatic to extract from it, no revelation that reframes history, no villain to name, no clear failure to correct. Just a moment when communication stopped. Just a record that acknowledges it did. And then, nothing. The discomfort comes from that nothing, from the fact that every system represented in these pages functioned as designed and still produced an absence no one could account for. Over the years, additional materials are appended. A maintenance report referencing the same equipment years later. It notes no defects. A training document updated to include a brief clause about redundant confirmation. It does not mention why. A policy revision that emphasizes documentation of silence as an event in itself. None of these documents refer back to File 001 directly, but they orbit it. The file becomes a quiet reference point, a shadow in the index, something that shapes procedure without being discussed. When asked why it remains sealed, the answer is always the same. There is no ending to file, no resolution to summarize, no lesson clean enough to teach. The archive does not like unfinished things. They create tension, they invite interpretation, they suggest responsibility without assigning it. So the file stays closed. Until now. Tonight, it is opened again, not to solve it, but to listen to it, to acknowledge the space where something should be, to accept that some records are not failures of investigation, but reflections of reality itself. Moments when something ends without explanation. Moments when a voice stops and the world continues anyway. This file is not famous. It was never meant to be. It carries no notoriety or scandal. It carries quiet. The kind of quiet that lingers long after the equipment is replaced, the staff rotated, the procedures rewritten. The kind of quiet that reminds us archives are not collections of answers. They are collections of what remains when answers do not arrive. File 001 remains what it has always been. A beginning without a conclusion. A record created because something happened, and sealed because no one knew how to finish writing it.
Before the silence mattered, there was a city. Not a skyline city, not the kind people photograph. This was a working city, one that dimmed rather than slept. A place that learned long ago how to keep moving quietly, without drawing attention to itself. The year matters only in texture, not in headline. Technology had settled into its habits. Machines were trusted, but not admired. Radios were solid. Lights were heavy. Screens glowed softly, not sharply. Systems were designed to last, not impress. People expected things to work. At night, the city became something else. Traffic thinned until intersections felt ceremonial. Streetlights cast long, patient shadows. Storefronts reflected themselves back into empty sidewalks. The air cooled just enough to make breathing noticeable. Most people were home. Those who weren't belonged to a different category entirely. Night work was not glamorous then. It was not romanticized. It did not come with stories worth repeating at parties. It was chosen for practical reasons: stability, predictability, the promise of hours that behaved the same way every time. Night shifts attracted a certain kind of person, not thrill seekers, not drifters, people who valued routine, people who preferred fewer conversations, fewer eyes, fewer variables, people who found comfort in doing necessary work while the rest of the city rested. They were often invisible by design. Their presence was felt only if something went wrong. In offices like the one described in File 001, nights followed a rhythm so consistent it became physical. You could feel it in the body after a few weeks. When to stand, when to sit, when to stretch, when to check a screen that never changed. Silence was not a warning sign. Silence was the goal. The absence of calls meant systems were holding. The lack of alerts meant nothing required intervention. A quiet radio meant the night was unfolding exactly as intended. This was understood by everyone who worked those hours. The job was not to create events, it was to witness their absence. The city supported this illusion of stability. Maintenance crews worked earlier, leaving behind clean hallways and empty trash bins. Administrative offices locked their doors, trusting night staff to keep watch without being watched themselves. There was an unspoken agreement. Nothing would happen, and if it did, there would be time. Night offered time. That belief shaped everything. Those who took these jobs learned quickly how to fill the hours. Some read, some wrote letters they never sent. Some memorized the patterns of lights across the city, watched windows blink on and off as people shifted in sleep. Others listened to hums, to distant engines, to the subtle changes in sound that indicated movement without intrusion. They learned the difference between quiet and silence. Quiet was comfortable, silence was rare. The city at night was never truly silent. It breathed through pipes and transformers. It whispered through vents and wiring. Radios carried that sound, a constant low hiss that became a companion. When a voice cut through it, it meant something had broken the agreement. But most nights, nothing did. Those nights blended together. Ask anyone who worked them long enough, and they will tell you it is difficult to remember individual shifts. They stack, they compress. Time loses its sharp edges. That was the appeal. For people who took these jobs, predictability was not boring. It was relief. Some were escaping louder lives, homes that never settled, days that demanded too much. Night offered a way to exist without explanation. You didn't have to be impressive at night, you just had to be present. The city did not ask questions after dark. It assumed competence. It assumed continuity. In that era, oversight was lighter at night. Fewer supervisors, fewer audits, fewer interruptions from people who didn't understand the rhythm. This trust was not careless. It was earned through years of uneventful shifts, through thousands of nights where nothing happened and everyone went home unchanged. Systems reinforced this trust. Redundancies were built in, but rarely tested. Checklists existed, but mostly to be completed rather than questioned. Procedures were followed because they had always been followed. Nothing had ever required them to be challenged. Night workers became custodians of this assumption.
They were the ones who watched the city sleep and confirmed it was still alive. The type of person who accepted that responsibility often shared certain traits. They were observant, but not anxious, patient, but not passive, comfortable alone, but not disconnected. They noticed details because there was little else to notice. A flickering light, a change in tone from a machine, a radio that seemed slightly more insistent than usual. They did not overreact to these things. They logged them. They trusted that if something truly mattered, it would make itself known. And most of the time, it did. The city rewarded this restraint by behaving. Night after night, the same rituals played out. Clocks advanced, logs filled, calls were made and answered. The idea that something could simply stop, without explanation, without escalation, without consequence, did not fit the model anyone was working from. Failure, when it occurred, was loud. It set off alarms. It left traces. It demanded attention. What happened in File 001 did none of those things. That is why it did not register as danger in the moment. It registered as inconvenience, as delay, as something to be checked again in a few minutes. That delay is important. It exists because the world of that night had trained everyone to expect resolution, to believe that systems bent but did not break. The city had earned that belief. It had been safe in the way only dull things can be. Dull enough to trust, predictable enough to relax into. So when the radio failed to respond, it did not feel like the beginning of a story. It felt like noise in an otherwise clean signal, a temporary deviation in a night that would continue exactly as planned. Someone sat in a quiet room under humming lights in a city that had given no reason to be afraid. Someone waited for a voice that had always answered before, and because nothing in that world suggested otherwise, they believed it would answer again.
The first cracks did not announce themselves. They never do. They arrived quietly, folded into routine, disguised as nothing worth interrupting a night over. At the time, no one called them warning signs. That word implies intention. These were just moments, small enough to be absorbed, ordinary enough to be forgiven. A check-in came late, not missed, just late. The log shows it clearly now, a timestamp that drifts a few minutes past its expected mark, the kind of delay that could be explained by a restroom break, or a slow response from equipment, or a conversation that ran longer than planned. Someone noticed. Someone always notices. But the note beside it is casual, a shorthand mark, no follow-up required. The system allows for small deviations. It always has. A radio transmission carries a faint echo one night. Not feedback, not interference, just a softness at the end of a sentence, like the sound didn't quite know where to stop. The receiver adjusts the volume. The echo disappears. No report is filed. Why would it be? Equipment has moods. Anyone who works nights knows this. Temperature shifts affect circuitry, signals wander, machines correct themselves more often than not. Another check-in arrives on time, but the voice sounds tired. Not distressed, not strained, just thinner. That is the word one of the reviewers uses later, writing in the margin with a pen that presses harder than necessary. Thinner. At the time, it barely registers. Night work does this to voices. Hours stretch, conversations flatten. People conserve energy by speaking less, not more. A supervisor considers making a note, considers it, then doesn't. No one wants to be the person who flags fatigue when fatigue is the baseline. No one wants to create paperwork over something that will be gone by morning. There is an equipment alert that appears briefly on a console. It clears itself before anyone can read the full line of text. The system logs it automatically, but marks it as resolved. No error code persists. No follow-up is triggered. The alert becomes a footnote. It exists only because the system is designed to remember everything, even things humans decide to forget.
One worker mentions offhand that a channel seemed quieter than usual. Not silent, just quieter. The comment is made in passing during a shift change while coats are being pulled on and off. It floats in the air for a moment, then drops. The response is a nod, a half smile. Probably nothing, someone says. Probably nothing is the most dangerous phrase in any archive. It is not negligence, it is familiarity. The nights continue. Logs fill. Time passes. Another check-in is delayed, this one slightly longer, still within tolerance, still excusable. The person receiving it glances at the clock, then back at the radio. Fingers hover over the transmit button, then pull away. They wait, and the response comes. Late, but complete. No explanation offered, no apology given, none required. Trust is built on consistency, and consistency allows for occasional lapses without collapsing. That is how systems endure. There is a maintenance report filed days earlier, noting minor wear on a component related to communications routing. The recommendation is non-urgent replacement. Non-urgent becomes postponed. Postponed becomes scheduled for a future quarter. Nothing in the report suggests risk. The component is functioning. That is all anyone needs to know. One worker dreams about the radio. This is never documented. It comes up later during an informal conversation, long after the fact. The dream is dismissed as stress, as the brain recycling sound. No one thinks to connect it to anything. Dreams are not evidence, they are noise. Another comment is almost written. A line begins in a log, then is scratched out. The ink leaves a faint scar on the page. The reason is unknown. Maybe the thought seemed silly once it was halfway formed. Maybe the writer worried about how it would look to someone reading it later. Maybe they didn't want to be the only one who felt something was off. The archive cannot tell us why that line was removed. It can only show us that it was. The file grows thicker, not with substance, but with proximity. Events cluster closer together. Minor irregularities appear within shorter spans. None of them demand action on their own. Together, they still do not form a pattern. Patterns are easier to see in hindsight. At the time, everything exists in isolation. A late call here, a quiet channel there, a brief alert, a tired voice. Each one explainable, each one survivable. There is a moment, small, easily missed, when someone does consider escalating. The thought is recorded in a meeting summary. The language is careful. Monitoring advised, no immediate concern. Monitoring becomes waiting. Waiting becomes normal, and normal absorbs everything. Human reaction is not dramatic in these moments. There is no panic, no dread. There is reluctance. Reluctance to be wrong. Reluctance to interrupt the flow of a system that has earned trust through repetition. Reluctance to create a problem where there might not be one. People working these nights are not reckless, they are conservative. They understand the cost of false alarms, the erosion of credibility, the way systems become numb if they are asked to react too often. So they choose restraint, they choose patience. They believe that what feels slightly off will correct itself because it always has before. This is not denial, it is training. The city reinforces this choice. Nothing else goes wrong. No incidents spike. No external pressure appears. The world beyond the night continues uninterrupted, which makes the quiet deviations feel even smaller in comparison. Why worry about a soft echo when everything else is stable? Why question a late check-in when the city is asleep and unharmed? Why disturb a working system over discomfort you can't quite name? The answer, of course, is now obvious. But it wasn't then. That is the tragedy of early warning signs. They do not feel like warnings, they feel like background noise. By the time they become meaningful, they are no longer small. They have already been absorbed. The file, when read now, shows these cracks clearly. They stand out on the page, they glow under scrutiny. But at the time, they were invisible in their ordinariness. They were moments people chose not to elevate, moments people trusted would resolve themselves, moments that asked nothing and were given nothing in return. The system held until it didn't, and when it failed, it did so quietly, through the same radio, the same routines, the same human instinct to wait just a little longer before deciding that something was truly wrong.
The night begins the way it always does, with arrival. A door opens, a light comes on, a familiar room accepts another body into it. There is no ceremony to the start of a night shift, no threshold crossed with significance. Coats are hung, bags are set down. The chair remembers the shape of the person who sits in it. We know the arrival time. It is logged cleanly, precisely, no deviation. What we don't know is what the room felt like in that first minute, whether the air was colder than usual, whether the hum of the lights registered at all, whether there was a sense, however faint, of stepping into something already unsettled. The records cannot tell us that. The first hour passes quietly. Routine checks are completed in order. Systems respond as expected. Status lights remain steady. The radio performs its role as it has hundreds of nights before. We know this because the logs are calm. No margin notes, no corrections, no added emphasis. Silence, documented as success. There are routine calls during this time. Short, functional, confirmations rather than conversations. A voice checks in, another voice answers. Both disappear back into static. Nothing lingers. This is important. The absence of detail tells us the night was still ordinary. By the second hour, time begins to stretch. This is not unusual. Night workers experience time differently once the initial tasks are complete. Minutes lengthen. Attention drifts, then tightens again around familiar sounds. The radio crackles intermittently. Each instance is acknowledged. We know this because each response is logged. What we don't know is whether those crackles sounded different, whether they carried the same texture as always, or whether something in them felt thinner, less anchored. There is no language in the log for texture, only timestamps. Another routine call is made. It is answered immediately. The voice on the other end is clear. Nothing in the record suggests strain, and yet later annotations circle this exchange. Not the words, there were few, but the spacing between them, the pause before the reply, the fraction of a second longer than expected. At the time, no one noticed, or if they did not consider it worth noting. The third hour arrives without announcement. Outside, the city is at its quietest. Traffic has thinned to occasional movement. Buildings hold their breath. Even the distant sounds feel muted, as if wrapped in cloth. Inside the control room, the lights remain unchanged. This consistency is comforting. It suggests reliability. A system check is performed. Everything passes. We know this because the checklist is complete. What we don't know is whether the person performing it felt reassured or merely resigned, whether the act of checking felt meaningful or perfunctory. The logs do not capture mood. Another routine call. This one arrives late. Not significantly, but late enough to glance at the clock. The response is delayed, then arrives whole. No explanation is given. No explanation is required. The delay is absorbed. Minutes pass. The radio remains quiet. This is still normal. Quiet means holding. Quiet means nothing is being demanded. The fourth hour begins. Fatigue settles in, subtle and cumulative. Not exhaustion, just the soft dulling that comes from repetition. This is when people become more attentive, not less. They listen harder. They watch small changes more closely. A brief transmission carries interference. Static overlaps the first word. The rest is clear. The interference is logged automatically. The human response is minimal. There is nothing to fix. The radio is still functioning. The fifth hour approaches. This is the midpoint of the shift, the time when people often check the clock without realizing they are doing it.
the time when the end feels imaginable but still distant. Another routine call is made. It is answered immediately. The voice on the other end is clear. Nothing in the record suggests strain, and yet later annotations circle this exchange. Not the words, they were few, but the spacing between them, the pause before the reply, the fraction of a second longer than expected. At the time, no one noticed, or if they did not consider it worth noting. The 6th hour begins. The room feels heavier now, not threatening, just enclosed. This is when small sounds become noticeable. A chair creak, the click of a pen, the low, constant hum that has been there all night. Another system check, another pass. Nothing changes. The radio crackles, then falls silent again. Minutes stretch. The next routine call is initiated. There is no response. This is not alarming yet the person waits. 10 seconds, 20, then the reply comes. Clear, normal, logged. What we don't know is whether the relief felt disproportionate to the delay, whether the person noticed their own reaction and dismissed it. The 7th hour arrives. This is when nights feel longest. The city is still asleep, but dawn has not yet earned its place. Time slows here, suspended between rest and return. A final routine check-in before the shift begins to lean toward morning. The call is made. The response comes quickly. This is the last confirmed communication. We know the time, we know the channel, we know the words used were minimal. What we don't know is how the silence felt afterwards, because silence followed. Not immediately, but inevitably. Minutes pass. The radio remains open, listening. No further calls are scheduled for a short while. This is normal. The person settles back into waiting. The clock advances. The 8th hour begins. This is where the records thin, not abruptly, gradually. The logs show fewer entries. This is expected. There is less to log when nothing happens. But something is happening. We just don't see it yet. A routine radio check is initiated. This one is not answered. The log notes the attempt. The absence is acknowledged. What we don't know is how long the person waited before making the second attempt. The timestamps do not capture hesitation. They capture action. A second call is made. Still nothing. This is unusual. Not catastrophic, just unusual. A note is added. Brief, neutral. Another minute passes. The radio remains silent. The person adjusts the radio, checks the channel. Everything appears operational. A third call is made. This is where time begins to slow for us, because we know what comes next, but they do not. The response does not arrive. The channel remains open, listening. The person waits. The clock moves. The lights hum. The city sleeps. This is the last moment before escalation would normally occur, before procedures shift, before silence becomes something else. The file shows us exactly where this moment sits, balanced, undecided, suspended. The night has not collapsed yet. It is still pretending to be normal. The radio has not failed. The system has not alarmed. Nothing has demanded action. And so the person waits just a little longer, trusting that the night, which has held for so many hours already, will hold for one more minute.
Morning arrives slowly, not with a shout, but with a dimming of night and a gradual increase in light through narrow windows. The city exhales. Traffic returns. Shops unlock. Somewhere, a train clatters along tracks, routine and steady. But inside the building, something is wrong. Quiet, but wrong. The first person to notice it is not heroic. They are practical, tired, and trained to trust the rhythm of the night. They arrive to start a new shift and notice the chair is empty. The console glows as usual. The hum of the fluorescent lights is unchanged. Nothing appears broken. Nothing blinks red. And yet, the radio is silent. The call is made almost casually. Hello? No response. There is a pause.
The kind of pause that exists in every office at the very beginning of a day, before anyone is fully awake, before schedules demand attention. A shrug is considered, then another attempt. Still nothing. The person checks the log. The final entries from the night before are ordinary. All routine transmissions are accounted for, all systems indicated normal operation. The last call, however, was marked as completed. The timestamp is precise, it is clear, it exists, and yet the voice it should have recorded has vanished into silence. They call again, louder this time, more deliberately. A supervisor is informed. There is hesitation, not fear, not panic, hesitation. The supervisor checks their own schedule, their own responsibilities, wondering if perhaps the night worker was joking, or mistaken, or misreading the equipment. They make their way to the control room slowly, deliberately. By the time both are present, the implications are only beginning to surface. Machines are functioning, screens display numbers, lights glow as they always have. The environment is perfect, orderly. Nothing demands alarm. Yet the chair remains empty. The supervisor kneels slightly to peer at the console. They glance at the radio, then the log. Every routine procedure is complete, every response accounted for, except for the missing confirmations that should have come after the final call. The supervisor frowns, just a small frown. They pick up the handset, then put it down. Again. They hesitate to make the next move, because everything about the night before had been normal, predictable, trustworthy. No one wants to be the person who cries wolf. No one wants to create a protocol where none is warranted. And yet, slowly the understanding begins to form. Something happened. Something that cannot be undone. Something that was never meant to exist, but now does. Calls are made. Procedures are followed. Other colleagues arrive. They check systems, review logs, examine shifts. They move deliberately. They speak in low voices. Nothing is raised to urgency. Nothing shouts alarm. There is no chaos. There is only careful, quiet observation. The first coworker, the one who noticed the silence, stands near the console. They run their fingers lightly over the logbook. There is guilt there, subtle, unspoken. The feeling of having trusted too easily, having relied on the patterns of a night that had always worked. It's not blame, it's recognition of how fragile even ordinary trust can be. The supervisor watches. Their hesitation lingers, not as weakness, but as thoughtfulness. They wonder if they should escalate, if they should break procedure. They review the past hours, every routine call, every minor anomaly. Each had seemed insignificant at the time. Each had been recorded and filed away, unexamined. Now, each small moment carries weight. Every delay, every faint echo in the radio, every almost noted observation becomes meaningful, almost unbearably so. The supervisor exhales, slowly, letting the realization settle. They do not raise their voice, they do not accuse, they simply acknowledge that the world, at least within these walls, is not as it should be. Another call is made. Someone trained in procedure, skilled at documentation. They review the logs, they check timestamps, they verify equipment. Everything is accounted for, nothing is broken. And yet, the final radio transmission, the one that should have been routine, was never followed up. No response, no acknowledgement, only absence. The room is filled with the quiet weight of that absence. It presses against the ears, against the mind. The machines continue their hum, oblivious. Screens continue their soft glow. Time flows. And yet, inside this room, everything has stopped. No one panics. There is no shouting. There is no sudden alarm. Just the slow, dawning understanding that something irreversible has occurred. Something that cannot be filed, logged, or explained away. Responsibility dissolves quietly. Not because anyone refuses it, but because it has no shape. It is diffuse. It rests everywhere and nowhere. People who would normally respond with certainty now move cautiously, consulting each other, waiting for confirmation that cannot come. The chain of command exists, but it cannot command what is already passed beyond comprehension. The first coworker makes another call, just to be certain. Silence again. They glance toward the supervisor. Both realize in the same subtle moment that this is no longer about procedure. No manual covers this. No protocol dictates action when someone has simply vanished. Minutes stretch. The hum of fluorescent lights becomes louder in the absence of voices. The clock ticks with indifference. Paper rustles as logs are reviewed. Pens scratch cautiously. It is only in these long, quiet moments that realization is complete. Something happened during the night, something that did not announce itself, something that began subtly, almost imperceptibly, and now exists as an undeniable truth. A person is gone. Not in a dramatic collapse, not in a chaotic alarm, just gone. The supervisor leans against the console, still observing. The first coworker remains standing, hands lightly touching the radio, as if proximity might bring back what has been lost. Others filter in, drawn by protocol, curiosity, or the soft call of procedure. They exchange words quietly, without urgency. Their voices carry the same restraint that define the night itself. The building, the systems, the city beyond, they all continue. The morning rush begins outside. The city awakes, indifferent. Inside the room, the world has narrowed to hum, light, paper, and absence. It is in this quiet that the gravity of the situation is felt most acutely. Not in panic, not in shouting, but in the slow acknowledgement of loss. That someone existed, moved, worked, and now is no longer present. That all the routines, the trust, the ordinary steps that defined the night failed to protect against a simple, unknowable disappearance. The silence stretches, the hum persists. Light shifts slightly across the room as morning advances. People move slowly, carefully, as if speed would dishonor what has occurred. There is no rush to report, no desire to dramatize, just observation, quiet record, and understanding that the system they trusted was incomplete. The night has ended, but the consequences linger, and the first cracks of realization will echo through every shift that follows. Because once a system fails, even quietly, it cannot be unseen. It exists in memory, in logbooks, in the hum of lights, in the spaces between voices. It exists wherever someone trusted that the night, as always, would answer back. And it did not.
There were explanations. There always are. When the file was reopened, investigators and archivists alike tried to piece together what could have happened. Each theory was plausible, measured, grounded in reality. None required imagination. None required leaps into the sensational. And yet, each theory faltered the moment the details were examined closely. Human error came first. It was the simplest explanation: a late check-in, a skipped procedure, a moment of inattention. Night shifts are full of small lapses. People are tired. Equipment is reliable but not infallible. A misdialed channel, an unlogged step, a pause unnoticed. On the surface, it fit. There was evidence to support it. Logs showed that minor deviations had occurred in previous shifts. A late transmission here, a quieter than usual voice there. Procedural notes suggested that minor mistakes were not uncommon, and they rarely led to consequences. But it could not fully explain the absence. No lapse could account for a complete disappearance from a working system. Every protocol, every redundancy, every check in place was executed. Screens lit correctly, systems reported operational, the chair remained empty, yet nothing was physically obstructed, damaged, or misused.
Human error could explain delays, not silence, not emptiness. Medical emergency was another. Perhaps the worker had fallen ill. Perhaps an accident occurred that went unnoticed in the stillness of the night. It was a reasonable thought. People do not exist outside the vulnerability of their own bodies. A sudden illness could render someone unable to respond. Supporting evidence was minimal, yet consistent with the scenario. No disturbances were logged, no alarms were triggered. That could suggest something internal, something invisible, fleeting. Yet no medical signs were ever found, no traces, no later discovery. The room remained intact, no evidence of injury, no sign of collapse, no hint that anything beyond ordinary fatigue had intervened. The theory explained possibility, but it left an emptiness where evidence should have been. Intentional disappearance was whispered quietly in meetings. Could the worker have left voluntarily, faded into the city unseen, taken by choice to vanish? This explanation satisfied some questions. It fit the absence of struggle, the unbroken systems, the quiet continuation of routine, but it required planning that the file's details contradict. Logs indicate no preparation, belongings remained, equipment remained assigned. Routine calls were attempted until the last moment. If someone had chosen to leave, they would have needed to act against these patterns, yet nothing in the record supports that. A voluntary exit should have left a trace in some system. None exists. External interference emerged as another possibility. Perhaps someone or something disrupted the system from the outside. A rogue signal, a misdirected call, a third party entering the building. This was logical. Systems have vulnerabilities. No environment is completely closed off. But examination revealed no breach. Doors were locked, access logs consistent. Surveillance, where it existed, showed no anomaly. The radio continued to function normally. The city itself, oblivious, provided no evidence of intrusion. The theory seemed convincing until every record proved otherwise. Each explanation considered alone had merit. Each seemed sufficient to those working with only part of the picture. And yet, every one faltered when confronted with the totality of the file. Each offered a solution, but none closed the case. This is the essence of the mystery. Not that we do not know what happened, but that no explanation survives contact with fact. Each theory bends, twists, and finally breaks under scrutiny. Human reasoning, careful and measured, cannot reconcile the ordinary and the impossible coexisting in the same space. Some proposed combinations of these explanations. Perhaps human error coincided with a medical event. Perhaps external interference exploited a routine lapse. But even these combinations leave gaps. They do not address the absence of evidence. They do not account for the quiet, uninterrupted systems. They cannot explain why the shift continued normally for hours, even as one person failed to respond. Over time, the room itself becomes part of the puzzle. The environment, the hum of lights, the steady screens, the predictable city beyond the windows suggests stability, safety. And yet, within that stability, the event occurred. It did not break the world, it passed through it silently, leaving nothing behind but questions. Archivists returned to the file repeatedly. They annotated, cross-referenced, compared shifts and protocols. They tracked patterns, they sought correlations. And yet, every attempted closure exposed the insufficiency of each theory. The file resists simplification. It does not yield to deduction or conjecture. Theories themselves become footnotes in the larger narrative. They are the human effort to impose order, to make sense, to reconcile what was witnessed with what should have been possible. They are records of thinking, of reasoning, of the need for explanation. None of them succeed. And perhaps that is the lesson contained in File 001. Not every disappearance is dramatic. Not every anomaly is visible. Not every unanswered call carries a story that can be neatly told. Some things are left unresolved because the system, human or mechanical, can continue even in the face of what it cannot comprehend. We are left with fragments, logs, notes, faint echoes of voices that never return. timestamps that mark the passage of ordinary time while extraordinary absence persists. The file grows quiet once more. The theories are recorded, each one documented and examined, each one acknowledged as insufficient. The work of the night, the shift, the city, and the human mind continues alongside it, quietly aware that some questions will never find their answers. And so the file remains open, because closure is impossible, because explanation fails where observation survives, because the story is not what happened, it is that nothing in the end can fully account for it. Silence endures, and in that silence we are left with the question the theories could not answer. Why? Not who, not how, but why? And in the quiet, that remains the heaviest truth of all.
The site remained, not untouched, not abandoned, not memorialized in any visible way. Life continued there, quietly, as if normalcy could erase the memory of what had happened. Lights continued to glow, equipment continued to hum, desks were refilled by new bodies, new people who followed the routines without knowing why the old ones mattered so much. The records remained, too, not celebrated, not hidden behind glass, simply present, waiting. Paper stacked in cabinets, audio logs stored in drawers, pages unaltered, yet impossible to read as a complete story. The gaps, the abrupt silences, the faint echoes, they remained exactly as they had been. No one added more, no one removed what already existed. The files stayed intact, a monument to absence. The people who waited for answers carried forward, imperfectly. Some never returned, some stayed in their roles, quietly haunted, knowing that the rhythm of their shifts had been broken once, and that it could be broken again. They whispered to one another, cautiously, about what they saw, about what they could not understand, about the discomfort of having trusted, of having relied on patterns that failed without warning. Life, as it always does, continued in other ways. The city moved on, the streets became busier, the buildings filled with noise and routine. The shift workers became quieter observers of that movement, sometimes participating, sometimes just watching. They learned to carry the memory in small, private ways, a glance at a console, a pause over a radio, the feeling that nothing was ever quite normal after that night. The equipment was replaced eventually. Logs were digitized, policies were rewritten. New procedures emphasized verification, oversight, and redundancy. And yet, these changes did not touch the absence. They did not answer the questions that lingered in the empty spaces between transmissions. The file itself, File 001, remained open. It had been given the number because it was the first case that resisted closure. Not the first chronologically, not the first recorded, but the first that refused to be finalized. Its designation is a mark of uncertainty, a reminder that some events do not fit into sequence, do not submit to narrative, do not respond to the need for explanation. The archivists continued to reference it, sometimes to illustrate procedure, sometimes as a cautionary tale. Its margins filled with annotations, later notes, cross-references. Each edition sought closure. Each edition failed. Every note reinforced the quiet truth. The file could not be completed because the reality it contained had no tidy ending. The people who opened it later approached it slowly. They understood, in a way that only time allows, that the file is not a story that can be told fully. It is a space to witness absence, to measure the weight of what cannot be known, to feel the human tension of loss, of responsibility, and of unanswered questions without the relief of resolution. Audits were performed, systems checked, no breach was ever discovered. No additional anomalies were reported that explained the event. Nothing, in fact, happened afterward that matched the original silence. That silence remains unique, singular, unrecoverable. And so, the tape stops. Not with finality, but with stillness. The room remains,
Screens glow faintly, machines hum, chairs wait. The logs lie in neat stacks, the paper unbroken, the ink faded slightly from years of storage. And in the quiet, in the absence of an ending, File 001 continues to exist exactly as it always has, incomplete, unresolved, and fundamentally human in its quiet insistence on being remembered. There is no revelation here, no twist to unravel, no final page to satisfy curiosity. Only the weight of what was observed, the lingering absence, and the slow, careful acknowledgement that some things are not meant to be explained. Life moves forward, the archive holds, but the silence endures. And in that enduring quiet, we are left to reckon with the fact that not all stories close, not all questions receive answers, not all nights end in comfort. File 001 remains open, and we sit with it, alone, in the hum of fluorescent light, knowing that some weight never lifts, some silence never breaks, and some mysteries are carried quietly, indefinitely, by the people who lived them and by the records that remember them.